We're here at Amaze Festival with Torfi from Ghost to talk about Phantom Spark, which is, it's not out yet actually, is it?
No, it'll be out in 2 weeks, August 15th.
Very soon then, 2 weeks. And we got a demo at the moment on Steam as well.
Correct.
Yeah, which is confirmed to work on the Steam Deck because I've been grinding it in the hotel room last night and trying to beat my times. I'm currently second. That won't last, that's for sure. First of all, what's the overall concept of the game? What are we looking at?
So we call it a precision time trial racing game. It's all about short tracks. So most of the tracks are under a minute long.
I've noticed that probably because of that, because you're trying to sort of get a flow state going, the tracks, it's less of a sort of wipeout type windy claustrophobic thing and a bit more sort of wide and sweeping and rhythmic.
Yeah, we tried really to get it sort of flowy, and there are sections where you can like hold the throttle for a long time if you get the perfect line through it. That was like a big thing in our level design. Yeah.
One of the things that kept me playing over and over was the fact that even in just the demo it has what's like 3 courses in it.
Yeah.
Is that the guy who runs that world, as it were, keeps coming back to me and saying, "Oh, by the way, I've just beaten your time." That's a cool mechanic. What made you come up with that one?
Yeah, so that was when I started making this, I made some prototypes, and Jon, who's another developer on the team, we share an office, and we were just playing it back and forth. And so I would set a time, and I would pass the controller to him, and he would beat that time, and I would try to beat it. And we really felt like this was like the best way to experience this game, was this back and forth of like, not only like that he beat my time, but that I got to see the ghost of his replay. Really helps you learn like, oh, like I see that he went a little bit wide here, or he could have gone faster through here. And that really helps you learn the tracks and improve. And so we wanted to basically recreate that experience for people, even if they don't have somebody next to them to play with. So that's what the concept of the NPCs sort of challenging you and giving you ghosts to improve. And the way that works behind the scenes is like, we've recorded for every track just like a bunch of times in like a wide range of, speeds basically. And so when you finish, we pick one that's like a little bit better than the time you set, that we think is like a good sort of carrot for you to chase. It's like a good target for you to sort of improve to. So that's the idea behind that.
And I guess once it's out and about in the world, those scoreboards will end up populating with very good times from very good, probably professional racing game players.
So so we aren't currently, like the NPCs will only ever pick like the times that we've set, but then you can challenge the leaderboard times as well. So there's going to be some like very, very competitive, way better than the times we're able to set.
And probably some techniques you'd never thought of, I guess, once it gets out there.
Already like with the demo, like we've seen some people do some crazy stuff in the game for sure.
So this sort of liquid flow thing goes quite well with the kind of Y2K-ish drum and bass feel as well. That liquid drum and bass thing, everyone knows what that's about. You're working on something where you don't need to use audio and you put some of that on. 3 hours goes by and you've done everything you thought you were going to do, you know what I mean? Who have you used for the soundtrack? And is it generative anyway, or does it react to your player, or is it just playing a cool playlist all the way through?
It's not generative anyway. So it's written by a great composer from Norway. His name is Joar, Renolen. I'm super happy with how it came out. So it was a bit of a process finding it. We knew right away we wanted something sort of drum and bass inspired. And actually the first sort of direction I gave him was I wanted drum and bass that sounded like it came from a different planet. And so initially I forbade him from using snare drums in their soundtrack, because I imagined that they don't have snare drums on this planet that this drum and bass goes from. And he made some really cool stuff, but it didn't quite have that feeling you're describing of like the flowiness. So we ended up going back to more just sort of like straight up liquid drum and bass. But I think he has some like really interesting textures in there still that I really like, and I think it sort of feels unique and does get you into that flow states. We have like a little bit of reactive component of like every track has like an ambient mix to it, and it goes back and forth between those depending on whether you're like in the menus and stuff, just to like keep that flow going,
I like the idea of not having snares, but I can imagine if you're missing dusty amen breaks, it doesn't really feel like drum and bass. You kind of have to have that touch point to really feel like, and we are in a warehouse that's used for rave here, so it all works very well anyway.
It fits.
In technical terms, the handling and so on feels very, very smooth. Is this a sort of custom physics?
It's very custom. So this is made in Unity, but we're using almost none of the sort of Unity physics engine. And that was like it took a long time to figure that out. So this game has been sort of officially in development for about 3.5 years. But before that was like almost 2 years of experimentation with sort of different approaches to vehicle physics. And what I ended up doing was like a pretty simple approach. Ultimately, the ship is really just a point in space. And we're doing a lot of just sort of like raycasts against the geometry to figure out sort of where you are in space. And that gives us a lot of freedom because we're not relying on the physics engine to tell us whether the ship is colliding with stuff or not. We can decide ourselves whether we're colliding with things and also like how smooth the curves should be and stuff like that. But yeah, it was a long process, like getting to that point. And it does mean that, so compared to games like Trackmania is kind of a close comparison to this game. That one has a bit more dynamic physics in terms of like when you launch off a ledge, like the car can tumble and whatever. We don't have so much of that. You go into this sort of gliding mode. It's a bit more controlled. And that's also kind of a result of this like, more custom physics approach of we want to just like sort of more control rather than simulation. But I think that gives us that like smooth, flowy feel.
Yeah, it definitely does when you're playing it. That's an interesting idea. So you're sort of interpolating between lots and lots of data that the ship's getting by casting out in a way.
Basically, yeah.
Smoothing a path based on that.
Yeah, it's running quite fast. Like the simulation runs at 200 updates per second. Yeah. Which means so even if you're playing on like a super high refresh rate monitor, like you should get an update every tick of the refresh of the monitor. But yeah, that took some doing to get that to feel smooth.
Because I've noticed that you can end up with sort of racing demos and so on that all have the same kind of feel. So do you think it's kind of vital to at least customize, if not build your own sort of system if you're doing this kind of game?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, it depends on what you're going for. But yeah, we really felt like we did experiment with some of the sort of more off-the-shelf stuff that's out there. And I experimented a ton with actually just using more of the built-in Unity physics. And yeah, I think it becomes harder to be intentional and make your thing feel unique. And yeah, I think our game does feel quite unique in terms of the vehicle control. And yeah, we haven't found out yet like how whether people will sort of discover that. It's interesting when you like put so much into something that you can only experience once you're holding the controller. Like it's hard to come across in screenshots or videos like how the game feels. But that's a nice thing about, I guess, like demos being a thing now. People can at least try the demo and see like, oh, this feels pretty smooth. And yeah, hopefully, I'm hoping that matters enough to people that they'll, appreciate that.
Yeah, I think demo's a great idea, especially if you're trying to do something like you say, custom and entirely your own. One thing on art style as well. What was it inspired the art style? I noticed sort of the buildings that are around in the first few demo stages kind of remind me a bit of Zelda or something like that. That's
interesting.
Sort of some kind of tribal-esque lost city sort of thing, maybe Aztec. Where did that come from? And the overall look as well of the ships. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so the visuals took a long time to nail down as well. So we're working with a great artist in the Netherlands. His name is Joost Eggermont. And we really just hired him because we loved his style. And we sort of like gave him a pretty open brief in terms of we wanted it to feel sort of fantastical. We wanted to feel kind of otherworldly, but also with like a bit of a sci-fi vibe. And we knew early on that we were going to build the levels sort of modularly. And I had this idea that like if you make it sort of look like modular setups can feel sort of like ruins kind of naturally. And so we had this idea of these like sort of ancient, this used to be some sort of monuments that people maybe like worshipped at or practiced some religion at a long time ago. Now they're kind of decayed. They've been repurposed into these like racetracks. And so that was like the brief we gave him. And yeah, it went through a lot of iterations. But I think we ultimately sort of just went by kind of rule of cool, just like whatever sort of like interesting objects he came up with, we were like, ooh, let's try to integrate that. And then he came up with sort of like 3 different kind of palettes. So we have 3 regions in the game, and there's 3 color palettes, but also palettes in terms of like the sort of various architectural elements that he used. And he's also a very like architectural designer and thinker. And so I think a lot of this is sort of inspired by real world architecture as well.
And I guess you mentioned sort of modularity there. I guess when you're trying to keep it as fast as possible, locked 60 on every system, you must have been doing lots to sort of reduce draw pools and increase how much things were built from preset pieces. Would you mind talking a little bit about how you optimize for speed in something like this, where speed is absolutely paramount?
I mean, it was a challenge on Switch, especially. It's going to come out on Switch.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And it runs at 30. It can touch 60 sometimes, but that was a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
The thing that got us there was it's a lot of occlusion culling is one thing, like making sure that that you have good blockers in the level. So we did try to build the levels a bit so that there's clear sort of, because it serves like gameplay purpose as well. Like you don't want your field of vision to be too polluted with other bits of track that aren't relevant right now or stuff like that. And then that also helps when you bake occlusion, then any geometry that has other geometry in front of it, you can just cull. So that was a big thing. We also did a bunch of stuff with so all of this environment stuff, even though it looks quite different, it's basically all one material.
Oh, okay.
And then we use vertex colors and some other stuff to differentiate this. And that's nice because when the entire environment is being drawn with one material, you can reduce draw calls a lot that way. Everything is also very static in the levels, so you can do static batching as well. So it was a mix of all those things, batching as much as possible and culling as much as possible, basically the two things.
Nice. And one final thing, is there anything else during the development for those sort of budding developers out there that you have a sort of one or two tips for what you've learned from this or any other game you've made, just to help people who are starting out now or coming towards their first release?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm always sort of relearning and always telling people is you want to figure out the gameplay as soon as possible. You want to have it playable as soon as possible, and you want to sort of work through the unknown questions in as raw a form as possible, as soon as possible. And I think we were able to do that. We had a playable prototype of this pretty quickly, but there were definitely a few things that I maybe wish we had just sort of right away prototyped, even though we wouldn't have sort of nice assets for it or whatever. You just want to answer those design questions as soon as possible, because if you haven't answered them and you've spent a year making stuff for it and then you realize this design doesn't actually work, that's kind of the worst case scenario,
I guess it's that trying to resist that temptation to start making fun artwork and sounds and polish.
Exactly.
When you might have something that could be way more fun if you just actually worked on the game first, right?
Exactly.
But it's so tempting.
It's hard to resist. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much for talking to me. I appreciate you giving me the time.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it coming out. I'm gonna try and beat my time as well and see if I can just get back up to 1 before I get soundly beaten later on, probably by you and many other people who are this high and humiliate me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.